All right, guys. So this is the addendum to the agency agreement, and it will be an addendum to either the buyer agency agreement, buyer agency agreement with rebate provision form, tenant agency agreement, buyer agency agreement. I'm sorry, non-exclusive buyer agency agreement, non-exclusive buyer agency agreement with rebate, non-exclusive tenant agency agreement form. So a lot of the things we've been on, we've heard people talking about, um, unless you change the buyer agency agreement, unless you amend it, unless you do an addendum to the agency agreement. So what I want you to understand is that you can use this form to change and add something different to the buyer agency agreement. People have talked a lot about, well, if I am only putting 2% in the buyer agency contract and a seller is offering a higher percentage, I don't get paid. How can I get paid that? How can that come to me? Well, it's two parts to it. One, yes, you can change it using this form, stating that you are going to change that percent to 3%. You also have to have that conversation first with your buyer, because when you're explaining the buyer agency agreement to the buyer, it does talk about in here, as far as the commission, that it could go back, anything over and above could be a credit to the buyer. Right here, the excess will be credited to the buyer, and the buyer is going to see that because you have to explain this form to them. Well, you may run into a buyer that says, well, I want the extra 1% coming to myself, or whatever that percent is, rather than you just saying, hey, we're going to change it to where 3% is getting paid to the brokerage, or whatever that excess is getting paid to the brokerage. So it is conversations you have to have. But when you're going through this, if you are changing that agency agreement and you're doing this addendum to the agency agreement, first off, up here, this addendum is attached to part of New Jersey Realtors. You have to check which form it is. And if it's the exclusive buyer agency agreement, it's form 121. Check that off. Okay. And then you also have to put dated what the date is of that agreement. If this addendum conflicts with the agreement, then this addendum shall control. So make sure those two parts are being checked off here. Put the date in here as far as what your buyer agency agreement is. Now, going through here, buyer tenant and buyer's agent / tenant agent agree that this addendum to the agreement is only to be used after the agreement has been signed by buyer / tenant. So make sure you have the buyer agency contract signed. It should be signed first. If you're going to change it down the road, this is the addendum that you're using to change that. Buyer tenant and buyer's agent / tenant agent agree to the following amendment to the agreement, which is incorporated into and made part of the agreement. If a specific section of the agreement is being amended, it is recommended that the section be specified in the following amendment. So if you are changing the compensation part, you have to go to what that is. You're changing commission from buyer. That is what you're changing. Okay. So you're going to put in there that what it is that you're amending is paragraph 5, section A, subsection 2, something to that extent. So it's specified so that this addendum speaks specifically to the buyer agency contract. Make sure you are referencing this buyer agency contract in the addendum as to what parts you are changing. If you're changing the compensation part, commission of broker, it's part 5. If you're changing the term, it's part 4. If you're changing agency relationship, anything like that with that disclosure, you have to make sure that you're referencing that in the buyer agency addendum. Okay. So hopefully this clears up some of that on how you can change that, what form to use. This is in .loop right now, guys. So if you need to change or amend, do an addendum to your agency agreement, it is in .loop. Go in there and utilize that. All right. So any questions on this, please let me know.